On September 17, 1862, Union General Ambrose Burnside's 12,000 troops set their sights on a narrow stone bridge, a vital crossing that stood between them and the Confederate right flank. The bridge was defended by just a few hundred Georgians, perched on the high bluffs overlooking Antietam Creek. Armed with muskets, determination, and an advantageous position, they were ready to hold back an army. For 3 grueling hours, wave after wave of Union soldiers charged the bridge, only to be met with relentless Confederate fire. The stone structure became a death trap, and the creek below ran red with blood. Burnside's men fought desperately to secure the crossing. But even when the bridge was finally taken, the cost was staggering, and the battle was far from over. Today we examine the harrowing struggle for Burnside Bridge, where strategy, bravery, and tragedy collided on the bloodiest day America has ever seen. So if you're curious, let's take a walk through history. The third and final clash of the Battle of Antietam unfolded on the Confederate right, where Union General Ambrose Burnside's 9th Corps faced the daunting task of crossing a heavily defended stone bridge over Antietam Creek. Burnside, whose distinctive side whiskers coined the term sideburns, was a man of charm, but lacked the confidence for decisive leadership. His position at the helm of the assault owed much to his close friendship with General George McClellan, who assured Burnside that his effort would be supported. According to Antietam's former lead historian Dennis Fry, the Union 9th Corps was likely positioned to the south of the battlefield to guard the Union left flank. Union General George McClellan already knew that the Confederates had successfully taken Harper's Ferry. This meant there were several thousand Confederates less than 10 miles away from the Battle of Antietam. Should those troops appear, it was Burnside's job to stop them from flanking the Union line. Across the bridge from Burnside stood 4,000 Confederate soldiers from Walker's division. They were positioned to guard the Confederate right flank. But the fighting on the northern part of the battlefield was ferocious, and General Lee needed reserves to help repel the Union attack. Lee sent word for reinforcements to come up and help with the right. It's at this point that McClellan orders Burnside to attack, hoping to keep the Confederate reserves in place at the southern end of the battlefield. When the Confederates see how formidable crossing the Antietam Creek would be for the Union troops, 3,600 Confederates ultimately moved north, leaving a small detail of Georgia infantry and North Carolina sharpshooters to defend the Confederate right. Burnside's 9th Corps, numbering nearly 12,500 men, found themselves facing what at first glance seemed an insignificant force. Just over 400 Georgians from Brigadier General Robert Toombs' brigade. Yet these men, hailing largely from the 2nd and 20th Georgia Infantry Regiments, were dug in on high ground above the bridge. Toombs, a fiery Georgia politician turned general, had been a staunch defender of states' rights and a prominent figure in the Confederate Congress before resigning to take a field command. At Antietam, his defiant stand with so few men would etch his name into Civil War legend. The Confederates held the advantage of terrain. From their commanding perch along the bluffs protected by trees, rocks, and natural cover, Toombs' Georgians poured relentless musket fire down upon the exposed Union ranks below. Supporting Toombs were several artillery batteries, including pieces from Colonel Henry Benning's brigade, which added to the deadly storm that lashed the bridge. The bridge itself, only about 125 feet long and scarcely wide enough for 4 men abreast, funneled Burnside's troops into a narrow, constricted killing zone. To attempt a crossing here was, in the words of one survivor, to march into the very mouth of hell. On the Union side, Major General Ambrose Burnside, commanding the left wing of McClellan's Army of the Potomac, grew increasingly frustrated at the delay. Burnside had already earned a reputation for methodical, sometimes hesitant tactics, and his failure to seize the bridge quickly was cited as one of the great missed opportunities of Antietam. Nevertheless, he pressed forward. He first ordered Brigadier General George Crook's Ohio Brigade to storm the bridge, followed by Colonel George Hartsuff's brigade, but both were thrown back in bloody repulse. The narrow approaches became clogged with bodies as regiment after regiment attempted the crossing, only to be cut down by the Georgians' disciplined fire. Recognizing the futility of continued frontal assaults, Burnside ordered a flanking maneuver. Brigadier General Isaac Rodman, commanding the 3rd Division, was tasked with leading his men downstream to Snavely's Ford, nearly a mile south of the bridge. The ford was a shallow crossing point, largely unknown to the Confederates, and Rodman's division, along with Colonel Hugh Ewing's brigade, waded through waist-deep water to outflank Toombs' position. At around 1 p.m., the 51st New York and the 51st Pennsylvania Infantry, led by Colonel Edward Ferrero, were given the chance to redeem themselves after prior poor discipline. Spurred by the promise of restored whiskey rations, the 2 regiments surged forward in a furious charge. Through smoke, shot, and blood, they stormed across the bridge, overrunning the last Confederate resistance on the far bank. The Georgians, now threatened by Rodman's advance on their right flank, as well as the furious rush across the bridge, at last gave way. By mid-afternoon, Burnside's corps had secured the bridge and pushed across the Antietam Creek. Yet victory came at a staggering cost. Over 500 Union casualties in the bridge assault alone, compared to fewer than 160 for Toombs' Georgians. The delay had consumed critical hours that McClellan could ill afford to lose. As Burnside's troops advanced toward Sharpsburg, seemingly poised to drive into the Confederate rear, fresh Confederate reinforcements, A.P. Hill's Light Division arriving from Harper's Ferry after a forced march, were already closing in. Though footsore, Hill's 3,000 men were eager to fight, and their commander, clad in his signature red battle shirt, wasted no time. Hill's forces crashed into the unsuspecting Union troops, shattering their ranks and driving them back in disarray. General Burnside, desperate to hold the ground his men had fought so bitterly to claim, sent urgent pleas to McClellan for reinforcements. Reinforcements McClellan had promised but stubbornly withheld. Burnside's forces, battered and outflanked, had no choice but to fall back to the stone bridge they had sacrificed so much to take. As darkness fell over the blood-soaked fields of Antietam, the battle came to an end. No decisive ground had been gained, and neither side could claim a clear triumph. September 17, 1862, would go down as the single bloodiest day in American history. The Union suffered 2,108 dead and another 10,293 wounded or missing. The Confederates fared slightly better in numbers, with 10,318 casualties. But for Robert E. Lee's army, this represented a staggering quarter of his force. Despite McClellan's overwhelming superiority in numbers, he declined to press his advantage. Lee, though, outnumbered 3-1 and bracing for a renewed attack, found none forthcoming. On September 18th, under the cover of night, Lee and his army slipped back across the Potomac River, battered but intact. McClellan could claim a strategic victory. Lee's invasion of the North had been halted, and the Confederate forces had suffered devastating losses. But the greater opportunity, the chance to crush Lee's army and possibly end the war, slipped through McClellan's cautious fingers. Antietam had brought both hope and heartbreak, its fields forever marked by the staggering human cost of a battle that might have changed the course of history. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time as we explore more curious history. Take care.